The laughter echoed through the sporting goods store like a slap across the face. 12-year-old Maya Johnson stood frozen, her cheeks burning with humiliation as Officer Derek Matthews doubled over, pointing at her like she'd just told the funniest joke he'd ever heard. "Special Forces?" He wheezed, wiping tears from his eyes. "Your mama." "Kid, I've been in law enforcement for 15 years, and let me tell you something ... double quote." He paused, looking around at the growing crowd of shoppers who had stopped to watch the spectacle. "There's no way in hell your mama is running around with the green berets." Maya's hands trembled as she clutched her friend's arm. The word she wanted to say, the truth about her mother's decorated military career, stuck in her throat like broken glass. But what Officer Matthews didn't know was that Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Johnson was already walking through the mall entrance, still wearing her desert camouflage uniform from the Pentagon briefing she'd just left. And when she walked into that store in exactly 18 minutes, Officer Matthews was about to learn the hardest lesson of his life. Let me take you back to where this all started just 30 minutes earlier. Maya Johnson was having what should have been a perfect Saturday afternoon. She and her best friend Zoe were browsing the athletic section of Sports Zone in Riverside Mall, looking for new cleats for the upcoming soccer season. Maya had just scored the winning goal in last week's championship game, and her mom had promised to buy her whatever gear she wanted as a reward. "I can't believe you made that shot," Zoe said, holding up a pair of bright blue Nike cleats. The goalkeeper's face was priceless. Maya grinned, her dark eyes sparkling with pride. "Mom always says accuracy beats power. She taught me that shot during one of her rare weekends home." "Speaking of your mom, when is she picking us up?" Zoe asked, checking her phone. Maya glanced at the store clock above the cash register. "Not for another hour. She had some meeting at the Pentagon that was supposed to end at 3, but you know how those military briefings go. She texted me that she might be running late." It was such an innocent comment. Just a 12-year-old girl talking about her mother's work schedule. But those words, Pentagon and military briefings, caught the attention of someone who shouldn't have been listening. Officer Derek Matthews was off duty, shopping for his own son's baseball equipment when he overheard Maya's conversation. Matthews was the kind of cop who believed he'd seen it all in his 15 years on the force. He prided himself on being able to spot a lie from across the room, and something about these two young girls talking about Pentagon meetings struck him as suspicious. Matthews approached the girls with the swagger of a man who was used to being the authority in every room he entered. His police badge, clipped to his belt even in civilian clothes, caught the fluorescent light as he walked over. "Excuse me, girls," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone cops use when they think they've caught someone in a lie. "I couldn't help but overhear you talking about Pentagon meetings." Maya looked up, confused. She'd never had a police officer approach her before, especially not one who seemed ... amused. There was something in his expression that made her stomach twist with unease. "Yes, sir," she replied politely, the way her mother had taught her to address authority figures. Matthews chuckled, shaking his head. "Pentagon meetings, huh? Let me guess, your mom's some kind of secret agent. Or maybe she's the president's bodyguard." The sarcasm in his voice was thick enough to cut with a knife. Other shoppers began to notice the interaction, slowing their browsing to eavesdrop on what was clearly becoming an uncomfortable situation. Maya's cheeks flushed. "No, sir, she's Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Johnson. She works in military intelligence at the Pentagon." The words hung in the air for a moment before Matthews burst into laughter. It wasn't the kind of laugh you hear at a comedy show. It was cruel, mocking, designed to make someone feel small. "Military intelligence," he repeated, loud enough for everyone within 20 feet to hear. "At the Pentagon, oh, this is rich." He looked around at the growing audience of shoppers as if inviting them to share in the joke. "Do you hear this, folks? This little girl here thinks her mama is some kind of top-secret military officer." Maya felt her world tilt sideways. The pride she'd always felt when talking about her mother's career suddenly felt like shame burning in her chest. Zoe stepped closer, whispering urgently, "Maya, let's just go to the food court," but Maya couldn't move. She was trapped in this moment, watching as a grown man, a police officer, turned her truth into entertainment for strangers. Word spreads fast in a mall, especially when there's drama unfolding in the middle of a store. Within minutes, what had started as a simple shopping trip had become a public spectacle. Matthews was clearly enjoying his audience. He'd positioned himself near a rack of basketball jerseys, using it as a stage for his performance. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced with theatrical flair, "we have ourselves a future novelist here. This young lady has quite the imagination." An elderly woman pushing a shopping cart stopped to watch. A group of teenagers paused their conversation to pull out their phones. A father with two young children lingered nearby, looking increasingly uncomfortable but unable to look away. "Tell them about your mom's top-secret missions," Matthews continued, his voice dripping with mock enthusiasm. "I bet she's been to Afghanistan, right? Maybe Iraq. Oh wait, let me guess. She's probably got medals and everything." Maya's voice came out as barely a whisper. "She does have medals. 3 bronze stars, 2 Purple Hearts, and a silver star for valor in Afghanistan." The specificity of her answer should have given Matthews pause. Most children making up stories don't know the exact names and numbers of military decorations. But Matthews was too deep into his performance to notice the details. 3 bronze stars, he repeated in amazement. 2 Purple Hearts, did everyone hear that? We've got ourselves a real war hero's daughter here. He turned back to Maya, his expression shifting from amusement to something more condescending. "Sweetheart, I've met real military heroes, I've worked with veterans. And let me tell you something, they don't look like your mama." The last sentence hung in the air like poison gas. Zoe gasped, "What's that supposed to mean?" Matthews realized he might have stepped too far, but instead of backing down, he doubled down. "I mean exactly what I said. I know what real soldiers look like, and they don't look like ... He gestured vaguely at Maya, letting the implication fill in the blank. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. The father with young children took a step back, clearly wanting to leave, but unable to tear himself away from the train wreck unfolding before him. Despite the tears threatening to spill from her eyes, despite the crushing weight of public humiliation, despite every instinct telling her to run, Maya found her voice. "You don't know my mother," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "You don't know anything about her." Matthews leaned down, bringing himself to Maya's eye level in a gesture that might have seemed friendly if not for the cruel smile on his face. "Listen, kiddo, I'm trying to help you here. People are going to laugh if you keep telling stories like this. It's better to stick to the truth." "I'm telling the truth," Maya insisted, her hands balled into fists at her sides. "The truth." Matthews straightened up, addressing the crowd again. "The truth is that this little girl watches too many action movies. The truth is that her mama probably works at the local DMV or maybe cleans office buildings at night. And there's nothing wrong with that. Honest work is honest work. But pretending she's some kind of military superhero, that's just sad." The words hit Maya like physical blows. Each syllable was designed to tear down not just her story, but her mother's entire existence, her sacrifices, her service to their country. Zoe tried to intervene. "She's not lying. I've been to their house. There are pictures of her mom in uniform with other soldiers." Matthews waved her off dismissively. "Pictures can be faked, sweetie. Ever heard of Photoshop? Halloween costumes, army surplus stores, anyone can put on a uniform and take a picture." An older man in the crowd shook his head and walked away, clearly disgusted. "This isn't right," he muttered as he left, but Matthews didn't hear him. He was too focused on his performance, too drunk on the power of humiliating a child in public. "I'll tell you what," he said, his voice taking on a challenging tone. "If your mama is really this big-shot military officer, where is she? Why isn't she here to pick you up? Probably because she's at work doing whatever it is she actually does for a living." Maya's voice cracked as she spoke. "She's coming. She had a briefing that ran late, but she's on her way." "A briefing?" Matthews slapped his knee. "Of course. A top-secret Pentagon briefing. Maybe she's planning the next invasion of Mars." The laughter that followed his joke was sparse and uncomfortable. Even his audience was beginning to turn against him, sensing that this had gone too far. What Matthews didn't know, what no one in that store knew, was that Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Johnson was already in the parking lot, having cut her Pentagon meeting short when she received Maya's text saying she was ready to be picked up. Sarah had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq. She led soldiers through firefights, made split-second decisions that saved lives, and earned every medal her daughter had mentioned. She'd also spent the last 4 hours in a classified briefing about Middle Eastern operations, still wearing her dress uniform because she'd come straight from a medal ceremony for fallen soldiers. As she walked through the mall entrance, Sarah noticed an unusual commotion coming from the direction of Sportsoni. Years of military training had taught her to assess situations quickly, and something about the crowd of people and the raised voices triggered her instincts. Meanwhile, back in the store, Maya was struggling to hold back tears. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a deep, burning anger. Not just at Matthews, but at everyone who was watching, everyone who was letting this happen. "Why won't you believe me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why is it so hard to believe that my mom serves her country?" Matthews shrugged, clearly tiring of the game now that his audience was becoming less responsive. "Because, sweetheart, the real world doesn't work like the movies. Real special forces soldiers are tough, experienced men who what?" The voice that cut through his sentence was sharp, clear, and carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to command. Every head in the store turned toward the source of the voice. Walking through the entrance, still in her desert camouflage dress uniform, medals glinting on her chest, was Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Johnson. Her presence filled the space immediately. This wasn't someone playing dress-up or wearing a costume. This was a career military officer whose bearing, whose confidence, whose very existence commanded respect. The uniform was pristine, perfectly fitted, adorned with ribbons and insignia that told the story of 2 decades of distinguished service. Matthews's face went white, the laughter died in his throat. The crowd fell completely silent. Sarah's eyes swept the scene, taking in her daughter's tear-stained face, the circle of gawking strangers, and the man in civilian clothes with a police badge who was clearly the source of the disturbance. "Maya," she said calmly, never taking her eyes off Matthews, "what's going on here?" Maya ran to her mother, her composure finally breaking as she buried her face against Sarah's uniform. "Mom, he said I was lying about you. He said you couldn't be in the military. He made everyone laugh at me." Sarah's jaw tightened, but her voice remained steady. She gently moved Maya behind her and stepped toward Matthews, who was backing away like a man facing a firing squad. "Officer Matthews," she said, reading his badge. "I'm Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Johnson, United States Army Special Forces. I believe you have something to discuss with me." The formal tone, the military bearing, the quiet authority. It was like watching a masterclass in command presence. Matthews, despite being a 15-year law enforcement veteran, suddenly felt like a rookie traffic cop caught speeding. I was just, the girls were," he stammered. "You were mocking my daughter for telling the truth about her mother's military service," Sarah stated flatly. "You called her a liar in front of strangers and suggested that someone who looks like me couldn't serve in special forces. Is that accurate?" The crowd pressed closer, sensing that they were about to witness something extraordinary. Phone cameras appeared, recording what was clearly about to become a viral moment. Matthews tried to regain some composure. "Look, ma'am, I didn't mean any disrespect. I just thought the kid was, exaggerating." "Exaggerating," Sarah repeated the word like she was tasting something bitter. "My daughter told you her mother was Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Johnson, Special Forces, Pentagon. Every word of that was true. Where exactly was the exaggeration?" "Well, Matthews glanced around, suddenly aware that every person in the store was staring at him with expressions ranging from disapproval to outright disgust. Sarah took another step forward. "Let me help you understand something, Officer Matthews. My daughter has every right to be proud of my service. I've spent 22 years defending this country. I've led soldiers in combat, saved American lives, and earned every decoration on this uniform. But the hardest battle I fight isn't overseas, it's right here, dealing with people like you who can't imagine that someone who looks like me belongs in uniform." Her voice never rose above a conversational tone, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. Matthews was visibly sweating now, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. "Ma'am, I want to apologize." "Not to me," Sarah cut him off. To her. She gestured toward Maya, who was watching with wide eyes as her mother systematically dismantled the man who had humiliated her. You owe my daughter an apology for calling her a liar. You owe her an apology for mocking her pride in her mother's service. And you owe her an apology for teaching everyone in this store that it's acceptable to humiliate a child based on your own ignorant assumptions." The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Matthews looked around desperately, as if hoping someone would come to his rescue, but the crowd had turned completely against him. Parents were holding their children closer, clearly disgusted by what they'd witnessed. Finally, he cleared his throat and looked at Maya. "I'm sorry," he mumbled. "Louder," Sarah commanded. "Everyone here heard you mock her. Everyone here should hear your apology." Matthews's face flushed red. "I'm sorry, Maya. I was wrong to laugh at you. I was wrong to call you a liar. Your mom is. She's clearly the real deal." Maya nodded slightly, but her mother wasn't finished. "Officer Matthews," Sarah continued, "do you have children?" "Yes, ma'am." "A son? He's 10. How would you feel if someone did to your son what you did to my daughter today? If someone took his pride in your service as a police officer and turned it into a joke for strangers?" Matthews's shoulders sagged. For the first time, he seemed to truly understand the impact of his actions. "I'd be furious, then remember this feeling," Sarah said quietly. "Remember how it feels to be wrong, to be called out, to face the consequences of your assumptions. Because somewhere, right now, another child is being told their truth doesn't matter. And maybe, just maybe, you'll think twice before you laugh." She turned to address the crowd that had gathered. "This isn't just about one ignorant comment. This is about what happens when we let our prejudices speak louder than our humanity. My daughter shouldn't have to prove my existence to strangers. She shouldn't have to defend my service to people who've decided I don't fit their image of a soldier." A woman in the crowd started clapping. Then another. Within seconds, the entire store erupted in applause, not for the show, but for the lesson they'd just witnessed. As the crowd began to disperse, several people approached Sarah and Maya. An elderly veteran, recognizable by his VFW cap, saluted Sarah with tears in his eyes. "Thank you for your service, Colonel, and thank you for showing that jackass what real strength looks like." A young mother with 2 daughters stopped to speak to Maya directly. "Honey, you should be proud of your mama. And you should never let anyone tell you your truth doesn't matter." Matthews had already slunk away, disappearing into the crowd like the coward he'd proven himself to be. But his absence didn't diminish the impact of what had just happened. Sarah knelt down to Maya's level. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" Maya wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I was so scared, Mom. I kept telling them the truth, but nobody believed me. I thought maybe I was wrong to be proud of you." Sarah's heart broke a little at those words. "Maya, listen to me. You were never wrong to be proud. You were never wrong to tell the truth. That man's inability to believe you says nothing about me or you. It says everything about him, but what if it happens again?" Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile she'd shown since entering the store. "Then you remember this moment. You remember that the truth doesn't change just because someone doesn't want to hear it. You remember that your mother earned every right to wear this uniform, and you earned every right to be proud of that." She stood up and took Maya's hand. "Come on. Let's get those cleats you came here for. I think you've earned them." As they walked toward the checkout counter, Sarah reflected on what had just happened. It wasn't the first time her existence had been questioned, and it wouldn't be the last. Being a black woman in special forces meant constantly proving herself, constantly exceeding expectations, constantly fighting battles that her white male colleagues never had to face. But today had been different. Today, the battle had involved her daughter, and that made it personal in a way that military combat never could. "Mom," Maya asked as they waited in line, "why did he think I was lying?" Sarah considered her answer carefully. This was a teaching moment, a chance to help her daughter understand the world she was growing up in without crushing her spirit. "Some people have very narrow ideas about what a hero looks like," she said finally. "They see movies where all the soldiers are white men, they see news stories that only show certain types of people in uniform, and they start to believe that's the only way it can be. They forget that courage comes in all colors, all genders, all sizes." Maya nodded thoughtfully. "So it wasn't really about you." "No, sweetheart, it was about his fears, his limitations, his inability to imagine something beyond his own experience. People like Officer Matthews aren't really laughing at us, they're afraid of us. Afraid of what we represent, afraid of how we challenge their assumptions about the world. They reached the counter where the teenage cashier, who had witnessed the entire confrontation, rang up Maya's cleats with shaking hands. "These are on the house," he said quietly. "My brother's in the army. He's going to love hearing about this." Sarah smiled and handed him her credit card anyway. "That's very kind, but we pay our own way. Always have, always will." As they left the store, Maya felt different. Not broken by the experience, but strengthened by it. She'd learned that the world could be cruel and unfair, but she'd also learned that truth had a power of its own. She'd watched her mother handle hatred with grace, respond to ignorance with education, and turn a moment of humiliation into a lesson in dignity. "Mom," she said as they reached the car, "I'm proud of you. Not just because you're in special forces, not just because you have medals, but because of how you handled that. You could have yelled at him, you could have embarrassed him the way he embarrassed me, but you didn't." Sarah paused with her hand on the car door. "Maya, the moment we respond to hatred with hatred, we lose. The moment we let someone else's ignorance turn us into something we're not, they win. Real strength isn't about overpowering someone, it's about maintaining your dignity while you prove them wrong." As they drove home, Maya thought about everything that had happened. She thought about the laughter, the humiliation, the tears. But mostly, she thought about the moment her mother had walked into that store and changed everything with nothing more than her presence and her truth. That night, the video of the confrontation would go viral. Millions of people would watch Officer Matthews get schooled by a real American hero. There would be articles written, think pieces published, and debates started about prejudice, assumptions, and the reality of who serves our country. But for Maya, the real lesson was simpler and more powerful than any viral video could capture. Never let anyone shame you for telling the truth. Never let anyone convince you that your pride is misplaced. And never, ever let anyone tell you that your heroes don't look like heroes should. Because sometimes, heroes look exactly like your mom. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is simply refuse to be ashamed of who you are and where you come from. As they pulled into their driveway, Maya smiled. Tomorrow, she'd wear her new cleats to practice. And when her teammates asked where she got them, she'd tell them the whole story, every word of it true, every detail worth sharing. Because that's what heroes' daughters do. They tell the truth, even when the world isn't ready to hear it. If this story moved you, remember, respect costs nothing, but its absence can wound deeply. Stand up for truth, especially when it's inconvenient. And never let anyone convince you that your story doesn't matter.